The world needs more innovations for a sustainable future. Silicon Valley is a world-leading ecosystem of actors working together to identify opportunities and scale innovations in a global market. The close interaction with leading universities and the strong presence of venture capital contribute to creating a dynamic innovation system. Vinnova Silicon Valley's mission is to highlight Sweden as one of the most innovative regions in the world and link the Swedish innovation system and Silicon Valley. Together with the other Nordic countries, Vinnova has created the Nordic Innovation House, which connects tech companies and research institutions from the Nordics with the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Vinnova also offers fellowships in Silicon Valley in collaboration with Wallenberg Foundation. Vinnova, we need to innovate how we innovate.
Welcome to Vinnova Silicon Valley and Sweden Innovation Day, broadcasted in collaboration with Nordic Innovation House. Vinnova Silicon Valley edition focuses on sustainable themes by 7 sessions in 3 days. Check the program for all our sessions. These sessions will be recorded and you will find it on swedensiliconvalley.se in a short while. Again, welcome and enjoy.
Okay, hello everybody, and good morning, good day, and good evening, depending on from where you're joining. And welcome to this session on cyber issues and the future of mobility. I'll actually share a little presentation here just to give you a quick background to the session. So my name is Erik Wetter. I'm an assistant professor at the Stockholm School of Economics, specifically the Department of Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Technology. And a little bit the reason why I'm in this panel and why the panel looks the way it does is it comes out of a Vinnova funded project, specifically the Strategic Innovation Program Drive Sweden, which is Vinnova, Swedish Energy Agency, and Formas initiative. And there is a strategic project under Drive Sweden called Sustainable Business Models for Robotaxi, which I've been a part of for the last year, and specifically spending the fall over in California in Silicon Valley. And the project has been looking at what factors and risks that support the development of sustainable business models for autonomous vehicles in the future. And what the project identified was that sustainable business models need obviously to incorporate and build on sort of quantitative or hard factors, underlying population, demographic trends, commuting statistics, vehicle statistics, the attitudes of customers and consumers, and their willingness to adopt new behaviors, such as riding in a car that drives itself rather than driving a car. And these are all pretty standard. But additionally, the project identified a couple of sort of qualitative or more soft factors. So sustainable business models also are going to have to incorporate political risks, also the attitude of consumers and regulators. They're going to have to incorporate and build on existing and emerging technology standards, such as hardware and also data sharing standards. And finally, one of the big areas here is cyber issues that have also become increasingly relevant. What we can see is this is the convergence of 2 big trends. Autonomous transportation, both of goods and people, is an evolving ecosystem where we can see that the boundaries between established industries and supply chains are being increasingly blurred. And at the same time, cybersecurity is a very specific and growing challenge that also is challenging these traditional divisions between the public sphere and the private sphere. So we see the need for new types of collaborations and partnerships in this area. So that is the purpose of this panel, is both to highlight the challenges and also to discuss and think a little bit about the potential risks and opportunities. So to help us highlight this challenge, we have this panel, and I'll just briefly go through. We have Anna Haupt, investment director at Industrifonden, which is, and Anna can correct me later, a government-funded or government-owned venture capital fund. So Anna also has a background from the automotive industry, so has been working in the area of autonomous vehicles before joining the venture capital industry. And to provide a US perspective, we have Katherine McClaskey, program lead at the very recent, I believe, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So it's one of the newest agencies, I believe, in the American national security ecosystem. So Katherine can provide a government perspective and specifically then on cyber risks and autonomous vehicles. And then to balance that, we have Gustav Söderlind, which is going to provide sort of the Swedish perspective on the same views. So Gustav works with technological issues at the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, which is responsible for sort of civil society protection in Sweden. And then finally, we were supposed to have Marika Eriksson, who is the head of the Center for International and Operational Law at the Swedish Defense University. And Marika has expertise in specifically the difference between the regulatory spaces in sort of peacetime or in crisis, and also have a lot of insights on cyber issues and cyber operations. Unfortunately, Marika came down with flu-like symptoms. So she's feeling good enough, so we don't have to worry about her, but she's not feeling good enough to be part of a panel, is what she said when we talked. So unfortunately, she won't be able to join. But she sent some pointers along the way. So I think we'll still be able to have a really good panel. So with that, see if I can like to lead over to starting with, we can go back to the beginning and just ask, if we go to Anna, just from an industry point of view, or maybe an investment point of view, would be quite interesting, private sector point of view on autonomous transportation in general. What's the view? If you get to represent the whole venture capital industry, what would you say about autonomous transport in general, and maybe related to the theme of the panel in particular?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the potential with these new technologies, autonomous technologies, is huge. It has been huge for several years if you look at it from a user perspective and from a demand perspective. For many years now, people have been frustrated that the automotive industry haven't been able to launch products that are sustainable, and they haven't been interested in looking into new technologies and the opportunities actually that they give them to change not only technologies but also business models. So from my perspective as an investor, I'm growing impatience, and actually I am becoming more and more frustrated that I see startups fighting with automotive industry companies that is holding them back. And this is, if you look at automotive, they haven't been forced to change in more than 100 years. The changes they've been executing for the last 100 years has been very small. Engine changes, it's been like turbo, it's been angles of aerodynamics, etc. Very small changes if you look at it from a big perspective. They have always been focusing on private ownership. What you see with self-driving technologies is that it's not interesting in itself, actually, from my point of view. The interesting interesting thing with self-driving technologies is that it's an enabler for new superior mobility services. And what we will see, Waymo is one of the first companies that is driving this, but we see a lot of startups trying to find their place in this new ecosystem that is evolving. What we will see is cities already now trying to incentivize and find solutions that will minimize the amount of privately owned cars in cities with different regulations. They have banned cars certain days in certain areas of the cities, etc. But they're still lacking the ecosystem solution. But we will see this ecosystem solution come. It's only a matter of time, and because the technology is there already, you need to put the puzzle together, the full puzzle. And then you will have this superior mobility service that can provide another solution that having your own privately owned car that can take you from A to B autonomously. You just order the car through an app and the car will come home to you and drive you to wherever you want to go and leave you there. And this is a service that I think will be for urban environments, but also it will be very interesting for suburbs and for rural areas, because today we have problems with quite low service level of public transportation in rural areas. So this is an opportunity for public transportation companies to higher the level of service also in areas where there are not so many people living. So I think this will be a huge transformation that we will see pushing and forcing automotive to change, but the change will not come from inside, it will come from outside, from new startups.
Yeah, so to set something up for later, would you say, so you're basically saying that the automotive industry, traditional manufacturers are reluctant to evolve or slow to change. Would you say this is mostly culture, or is it the regulation that's stopping this?
Culture. That's definitely culture. My experience from working with the car industry and automotive industry is definitely that the people working in automotive, they work within these companies because they love to drive. They love to sit behind the steering wheel and feel the power. And having someone coming from outside, like I did, saying that I think we should remove the steering wheel is really, really not okay for the engineers that has been working maybe 20, 30 years, having an expertise within steering wheels, within gas pedals, within many different areas associated and related to the driver. And now with autonomous technologies, you need to change completely the mindset of how you design future robotaxi cars, where every occupant is a passenger and you don't have a human driver anymore. You need to design the car for privacy, even though you go together, you ride together with strangers. You want a private area, you want the private space. And I believe, as my background is an industrial designer, my background is to find solutions using carrots, not sticks. So I believe that the automotive industry, the ones that decide to really win this race in the end, they need to focus on the passenger experience and design the vehicle completely different from what it looks like today.
Right, so culture is a big thing, and just to, because we're gonna, the other big factor here is regulation. And if we talk just about regulation for self-driving vehicles, and I know you've looked into this, because sometimes you hear that the regulation isn't updated, so it doesn't really allow for autonomous transportation. What's your...
Yeah, when it comes to regulations, I've been in dialogue with the Swedish Transport Agency, and they've been prepared for autonomous pilots applying for approval for many years already, and they've been quite surprised that there hasn't been more companies that want to approve autonomous pilots. Talking with them, they say that there is nothing actually that is holding autonomous pilots and then growing bigger and bigger, becoming more and more mature ecosystems to be approved, as long as they prove they are safe and secure. So it's only a matter of within the companies to use knowledge that exists about designing safe and secure vehicles and systems and softwares. If you believe in your product, you can also approve it with as long you can approve with exceptions from existing standards. That's possible today.
Yeah. So, and now you were talking about the Swedish Transport Authority then. So a summary then would be that if we look at Sweden, right? So then the regulation allows for autonomous transportation, but the industry has been holding back largely from culture. So we don't see that many pilots in Sweden.
Yes, that's a good summary. And I think if you look at different countries in Europe, it looks the same in most countries. If you look at Germany, unfortunately, on the other hand, I would say the car lobbying has succeeded to demand a human driver. And this is holding innovation back in Germany. And this will become a problem for Germany. And I will follow this development carefully.
So in Sweden and in Europe, you say the culture is holding this back, but then I know you've also looked into, if we look across the Atlantic to the US, and there it looks quite different, right? So what's your take on what's happening there in terms of, I mean, the number of pilots is bigger there.
The number of pilots is much bigger in both the US and in Asia, in particular in China. We've been mostly cooperating with Chinese companies since at NEVS we had Chinese owners. But I would say that Europe is not as mature. The startups in the US has matured much more. There's more money there as well. And I think in Europe, we're held back by automotive industry. It's really, really heavy here with a lot of power, direct and indirect with politicians.
All right. Well, you could argue, I mean, if we look at the US, you have some large automotive manufacturers there as well, but maybe that's being counterbalanced by an equally influential tech industry?
Tech industry and innovation industry. Innovation, I think innovation and VC has a bigger, it's a much bigger landscape in the US with VCs than in Europe within this field.
Yeah, I mean, so to segue over, so as I mentioned before, I had the chance to visit Silicon Valley before Christmas, and just looking at San Francisco, I think we have, if it's more than a handful pilots already driving self-driving vehicles in the city. So clearly, it seems to be more innovation or more push to allow for these pilots and self-driving cars in the US. But then we have the challenge then. So it seems like the regulation and maybe the culture in the US is more allowing, so the innovation is more enabled in the States. So just to segue over to our US guest here, Katherine, if we then talk about, we have all these new vehicles, all these new transport systems that are kind of exploding. Could you say a few words on what's the government perspective on that in terms of vulnerabilities or risks, maybe?
Yes, so actually this is a great segue, and Anna, thank you for bringing this up. Yes, we may have more sort of, as you say, innovation, but the US does not have sort of a regulatory structure within us. So I mean, we can have more innovation. We can have all these different tech companies coming forth and creating all of this, new technologies. But I do want to note that over here in the US, our Congress has not enacted a specific laws regulating this technology. We did try, I will say, in 2017. It's called the SAFE Act, but it did not pass. If it had, it would have been enacted and it would have created requirements for cybersecurity and data privacy and other uniform guidelines. So this also leads to more of an issue we have again over here, is that this leads now down to the safety of passenger vehicles within this technology is traditionally now regulated, I will say regulated under a combined federal state framework. For example, we have our National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, that regulates the testing and safety of our motor vehicles, and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which sets safety standards for trucks. However, I do want to note that these are both, they're all fully voluntary standards. There's no compliance, requirement, which then leaves us down to the states. So therefore, yes, we do have more innovation, say in, of course, Silicon Valley and California, but the laws adopted to date amongst our states are far from uniform, and they provide significant flexibility to companies investing in AV research. But there's, again, no uniformity in technology about safety or security issues. So if that answers your question, we can talk more about that, and I can give it back over to you.
Yeah, I can actually, so just to follow up on that, it's quite interesting because the image of, cyber issues have been more and more visible because of recent hacks. So they have some visibility. And also, we've seen like people hacking Teslas or remote, hacking cars remotely or locking them, stuff like that. But we also had a discussion previous to this panel, and the point is when we talk about these autonomous vehicles, it's not just a hardware, it's not just a single vehicle we're talking about, but it's part of a bigger ecosystem, right? So as I understand it, the risks or the vulnerabilities increase once you have a vehicle that's autonomous and connected. And I guess it's just a case in point that, as you said, your agency is a new agency, as I understand it, that's specifically devoted to national critical infrastructure in the United States. And your job is to look at the transport system. So, would it be safe to assume to say that the US views autonomous vehicles not just as a transportation issue, but as a national critical infrastructure issue?
So we are new. We came about after 9/11, I know. So we're the newest in that. But yes, I am part of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is new. It was only, came about under 2 years ago. But so we're looking at how cyber physical systems can emerge and create, new emerging threats. So right now, again, we're only talking about cyber, but right now we're also looking over at our end how like these cyber vulnerabilities can then move on to create, say, a vehicle ramming incident, a vehicle creating an IED incident. And so, to mitigate risk, we have to look more about how critical infrastructure owners and operators must, fully understand their business systems as well as the dependencies and interdependencies of cyber physical integration. So, because this is really, critical to the implementation of appropriate security measures and the establishment of effective plans and procedures that may reduce the impacts of a successful attack against, autonomous technology. Because again, we've talked about this a little bit. A targeted attack could go so far as serving criminal purposes, such as blackmail or fraud, or maybe a means of supporting state-sponsored espionage by gathering, certain data on U.S. persons with access to national security information. So it's really something that we are looking at.
Yeah, so you're not just, the big risk you see is not getting locked out of your self-driving car, but it's a much bigger systemic issues that you're looking into.
Well, we're trying to do both. I will say that we want to provide, our individual stakeholders, because we do have federal fleets over here. So, and as I assume, it's all across the country and across the world, but we're also looking toward our critical infrastructure stakeholders. So, in our supply chain. So we're looking at, yes, how can you and I, if we own a Tesla, create those technology, those mitigation options that will help you be less susceptible, say, if you are a private person or if you do work for the government, to not be sustainable, to those threats. And then also moving ahead and looking, how more larger corporations can work to, evaluate those threats and work and mitigate against them.
Okay, great, Katherine. Thanks so much. So the U.S. perspective, and I mean, it sounds very, very proactive and kind of forward-looking because you're talking about like very advanced technologies. So I think it would be interesting if we could move to sort of the counterpoint, or not the counterpoint, but the counterpart. Then would be Gustav. At the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agencies, because I know when we talked, Gustav, you said that these cyber issues, I mean, we talk about robo-taxis, self-driving cars, it's easy to get like a science fiction image here. But what you mentioned also is that these issues are actually already existing, but in maybe sort of more, what could be perceived as more mundane or maybe not obvious acquisitions or purchases or vehicles.
Okay, maybe I could start with where I'm from, rather where I'm not from. So I'm not from the Swedish Transport Agency, so I have nothing to do with regulation or inspection of the systems. I'm from the Civil Contingencies Agencies, which means that we are responsible for public safety, emergency management, and civil defense. So we make sure that society will keep working also in the case of war, that the critical services will be available, that civil society will be able to support the military in the defense of the country. And transportation is a very important aspect of this. So specifically, I've been looking into industrial control systems. So the things that run our power plants, our water plants, the cybersecurity of these systems. And a car is essentially nowadays an industrial control system. So the same vulnerabilities and the same issues exist there as in the normal ICS that we have. And we have, for a few years, been given the Swedish Defense Research Agency the task of producing material for us. So they have, for instance, had a look at what is the regulatory environment for heavy vehicles and smart vehicles. What does it look like inside a vehicle? And basically, the issue that we have already today is that when you're buying a new car, you are buying a car full of computers. You're basically doing fly-by-wire already. You have maybe 50, 100 electronic control units. You have lots of intercommunication networks inside the vehicle. The vehicle is connected to the manufacturer, possibly to a fleet management system if you're running a truck. In some cases, third-party systems, if you have installed some other hardware in the system, possibly into the central bus system. You are connected with your mobile phone. You have the multimedia system. So basically, already today, you are sitting in a vehicle full of computers and full of access points to the outside. And this is a risk. The good thing is it's very complicated. So it takes an effort to learn how to access it. So maybe it's not worth the effort yet to try to hack it on a large scale. But that doesn't mean that it will never be. So on top of this already very complex system, we're going to put the additional sensors and additional systems that will in some way replace the original driver. So you have a very interesting, I call it melange of systems interacting. And from our viewpoint, the main concern is, of course, the state actor threat. That in the case of you have a country that's under pressure by another country, then you could experience that buses stop working, that the logistic chains stop working, food transport, diesel transport stop working. So basically that vital transport chains are disabled. And then we have the criminals, the ransomware, and we see that they are already attacking logistics, but usually at the back end. Basically, they are attacking the systems where you know what are the contents of the truck, where it's supposed to go. But the next step would be to attack the truck itself. You block it, then you have to tow it to the garage to unblock it. If you do it to a lot of vehicles, then you have a big problem. Other issues could be like the black swan events, some unforeseen bug or a cascading effect that means that, okay, we have all of these self-driving vehicles. It's been very economical. We can use the infrastructure more efficiently, so we can pack more vehicles into the existing roads. But suddenly we have to disconnect the self-driving systems. We have to start driving them ourselves. Then we cannot have these very tight spaces between the vehicles anymore. Do they fit in the infrastructure? The lorry drivers, the skills, are they still there? Presumably not. Other issues that we see, you have all these connected systems that are supplying our sensitive installations. You could possibly start tracking where are these installations, what are the supply chains, what is being transported where. And this is for the state actor and for the criminal threat. Another issue is, if we go back to this very large amount of computers that we have here, these computers will of course be upgraded periodically. Security patches, functionality upgrades. A car is becoming a service. So you buy a new service, you unlock something in the software in one of the computers. A question could be, when does this change in software require a new type of approval? And for which components? So it will be a very interesting problem to keep track of, the interdependencies between all these systems to identify what is critical enough to require that this is a whole new car, really, just because of the change in the software. Another issue is responsibility. If I buy a new car, how can I know what's in it? How can I know what the previous owner has done with it? Has he installed some new hardware? Has he made some modifications to some software? Has he not updated some systems? Basically, what is my responsibility to make sure that the software is safe in the car that I bought? What is my responsibility? What is the responsibility of the previous owner? And what is possible to know about the car? What can you as an individual find out about the car? This leads on to the question of what will be the role of motor vehicle inspection. Right now they check the mechanical issues. The brakes function, the environmental systems are correct, so you're not releasing too much carbon monoxide or whatever. Will they be tasked to look into more deeper issues? One good thing is that we have the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe cybersecurity regulations coming up, which will enforce some cybersecurity hygiene and requirements on the manufacturers. both in the creation and the lifetime of the vehicle. But what we see is that we need to raise the awareness of the consumer as well. And we are starting in our own little way. So we are, since we are a mix of the crisis management agency and the rescue services main agency, we are creating a guidebook for Swedish municipalities for including cyber when they are purchasing new fire trucks, because we see this as a quite important issue because they last so long. So any cyber vulnerabilities in these systems will last for a long time. So
yeah.
Well,
could I break? So what you're saying is to build on, to combine what Katherine was saying, what you were saying. So the risks in vehicles, or is that they could be used for attacks, they could be shut down, they could be used to gather information either on individuals and on systems. So, but as you were saying, then I mean, most people were saying, well, it's great, right? Because it's the government's problem. But then in the discussion we had before, the question is, when does it become a government problem? Because if my car gets hacked, everything that you said just happened to me. I'm like, yeah, that's, you know, I believe it was a state actor. So I mean, it's your problem, right? Or when is it a government problem?
Well, a government is many things. When regulations are broken, it's part of the government's problems. When the large public safety is threatened, then it's another part of the government's problem. So you have different aspects here, but from my viewpoint is when you have a systemic threat to the functioning of society. Of course, the individual is of course also important, but yeah, from my viewpoint, the first step is to provide the public with the knowledge to raise their awareness so they can start understanding what it is and making demands on the security of the systems.
Right. Yeah. So I can do a segue here and take some of Marika's points that she shared before the panel, because again, sometimes an assumption is, as you mentioned, if there is a state actor or somebody coming in, it's the government's problem. But then what we're talking about is the attribution problem. So first of all, it has to be found out that it's a state actor or a criminal actor or something else. And the second thing is it has to happen on a scale that's big enough so it is a government problem and not my individual problem or maybe an individual company's problem. I mean, if a startup company in this automotive space, suddenly their product gets compromised or hacked or ends up doing something, there is a certain threshold. I mean, up until a point, it's that company's problem. Maybe that the VC fund that invested in that company's problem. So we have both a scale problem when it becomes a government problem, and it's also the attribution problem. So somebody actually has to find out who's behind whatever is going on. And then the question is, I mean, whose responsibility is it to find out? Maybe the small startup company has to find out who's behind it before they can call, say, the relevant government agency. So there is, I mean, it's a big gray area on whose problem is it, and who should call who. Anybody wants to weigh in on that? Catherine.
I'll start. Again, as we all know, our government over here is very much different. I mean, there's no federal regulations and there's no overall guidance about what is going to happen. And so then looking into the liability issues, like just speaking on insurance, is a huge issue. I mean, I'm not going to go into it, but like, look at health insurance. So, you know, if you were looking at that, you know, use that as sort of a metaphor. If we're looking into something happens over here, you know, are we looking at the car? Are we looking at Toyota? Are we looking at the insurance providers? Are we looking at who made the car? Are we looking at who insured the car? It's a very different sort of kind of, you know, it's a battlefield that we have to deal with. And so that is something that we're working on over here to sort of deal with. But, you know, as we can see, it's sort of slow moving. it's still sort of a mountain that we have to climb.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Or?
Well, I would say attribution that you were mentioning, that's very, very difficult to do. I mean, it's hopeless to say who did something. Not that long ago, we had a case of lots of taxi cars here in Sweden being blocked by software in the alcohol lock. So when the date switched, the alcohol locks stopped working. And without the functioning alcohol lock, you cannot start the taxi. So a whole fleet was blocked by this dependency to another system. But was it a mistake in the code, whatever? So this is the responsibility of the taxi company to make sure that they have done their own risk analysis and done security analysis and keep their systems working and have a contingency plan for when they don't work. You have to do, as someone was saying in the previous panel, you have to do the scenarios and figure out how to keep the business running, because eventually something will happen.
Yeah, and as you, just to build on what you said, right? So the whole point, if we talk about cyber issues, the whole point of attribution, finding out who did it, is very hard, partly because that's a lot of the time a cyber attack is set up in a way to hide who did it or to point the finger somewhere else. I mean, that's the whole point. So the discussion I had with Marika was saying the government, the state approach is to find out whether it was a state actor behind it. And if they can attribute it to a state actor, then the state can respond. So that's, of course, if another state actor does something, they hide that they're a state actor, so the state can't identify that they're a state actor. That's kind of the whole game. So it is very, very hard. I mean, the state can't step in until they know it's another state actor. And so basically the problem is in the knee of, as you said, the taxi company, or maybe the software company, or the insurance company, or whoever gets the call, right? And then just recently, actually, and this is just a very short time ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago, the insurance industry, the biggest Lloyd's Reinsurance, one of the oldest, biggest reinsurance company, actually went out and updated their cyber insurance policies. So currently, acts of cyber warfare between state actors is not covered by insurance anymore. So, which is kind of a big deal, because before, obviously, everybody could just say, well, it's the insurance company's problem. But now, actually, the insurance companies or the insurance industry is saying, no, if it is a state actor, it's a state problem. It's not an insurance problem anymore. So would you, if I ask maybe Gustav and Katherine, would you think that this is going to speed up public-private collaboration, maybe in the attribution area? Because it seems like the insurance industry just made it a billion dollar problem to solve.
I'll let Gustav go first.
I don't think you can do anything about attribution. Whenever you point a finger, there will always be the risk that you're pointing at that someone that was framed or the wrong person. So no, not to attribution, but this could force people to start doing their homework more seriously. This could help the IT professionals to make the case to the bosses with the money.
Okay, Anna, was that a hand raise or a...
Yes, I felt it was. I needed to also step in because I think talking about risks with cybersecurity, I think it's also important to remember that we shouldn't swallow the elephant in one bite. We need to divide all the things that Gustav now mentioned. We need to divide it into different categories. For instance, there's a difference between a privately owned car and those risks, and a robotaxi owned by a fleet with fleet management systems. There's also a huge difference between alcohol locks, where the car will not start. There's no risk for anyone's safety when it happens. In relation to if you have an autonomous software and that fails in 50 kilometers an hour, fails to stop when it should stop. Completely different risk and a much higher risk, obviously. Working within automotive, I would say that these cybersecurity risks are taken care of very seriously. And a big thanks to the tradition within automotive, I would say, working with safety and personal security for many years going back. So I don't see that we should paint a picture where cybersecurity is, it's risky, but it's not impossible to handle, is what I would like to also add.
Yeah, so coming back to then the culture and regulation that we were talking about before. So you, before we kind of concluded that the automotive industry is, their culture is maybe a bit averse to autonomous vehicles because of lack of innovation. But at the same time, you're saying that what they have developed instead is a high security conscious or like a risk awareness.
Yes.
So if we take the flip side of that, then we see a lot of innovative new startups, companies that are driving the technology development in automotive. But maybe would you say that they're lacking maybe a little bit in security consciousness?
Yes, and I don't know. I wouldn't want to dare to say how much they focus on safety and security in startups and in different startups. But I would say that I believe that the big OEMs will buy the smaller startups. We will see that happen. We see that happen already now. But I think that they will become more and more aware that, okay, so we cannot just find solutions of the innovation part ourselves. It's too hard for our organizations to switch into this innovation mode. So then we have to find other companies that can contribute with the innovation part, and we can contribute with safety and security and that kind of knowledge, which is huge within automotive.
Would you say from an investment perspective that cybersecurity within autonomous is a good investment theme or thesis?
It could definitely be it, yes. With having, if they can show the analysis behind their focus area, I think it could be really interesting to look into.
Great, thank you. And then nearing the end, I mean, so the point, and thank you, Katherine and Gustav, for participating. I think one of the points that you made by just being here is that governments are taking this seriously and looking at it from maybe a more systemic or infrastructure perspective. So both old and new companies in the autonomous transportation space are not just active in a growth market, but also in national infrastructure and maybe coming under the cover of national security at some point, which is maybe something that's good to think about. At the same time, it's not necessarily so that the government's going to step in at any side of problem. As Gustav was saying, it's going to be the problem for the specific company or provider in the first instance and until it becomes a big enough problem. So it's kind of a flip side to that coin as well, right? Any other last from Katherine and Gustav? Would you like to say any like parting words of wisdom or anything to think about for companies and stakeholders in the emerging space of autonomous transport? Anna too, of course.
Well, it's always cheaper to think of security early in the process.
That's a good one. And also maybe add to that what you said, something is going to happen, right? Sooner or later. Is that what you said?
Yes,
Yeah.
I will go off Gustav's point. Yes, it's cheap to do, the work now. So again, just keep thinking about the future and where this technology is going to go, because it's better to do all of the mitigation and all of the strategies now than in the future. But yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, with that, I think we've reached the end of the panel. So thanks to Anna, to Katherine, and to Gustav for joining in different time zone. And thanks also to all the participants from wherever you're joining. So a word from the sponsor, of course, Sweden in Silicon Valley, or Vinnova, is that you should, the recordings are going to be available on the website. I can see it's in the chat. And that's it from us.